how to think and do machine learning model deployment. Let's see in this video. What are the questions to ask yourself when you think of model deployment? Very, very important topic. The second important topic that I'm covering, and I don't see many tutorials on this topic, is understanding different types of deployment. So this is not discussed in many of the videos out there. And third is SageMaker offerings for model deployment. So from AWS SageMaker point of view, in what ways you can deploy model and what are the offerings for that. And last but not the least, I'm going to show you one demo of SageMaker plus Lambda plus API gateway, and I'm going to show you how the end-to-end flow works in the world of AWS. Okay. So in this video, I'm not going to bother about how much time it is going to take, guys, because my intention here is to give you end-to-end knowledge. So please be little patient and watch this till end. You will learn a lot of things. First thing is, what are the questions to ask yourself when you think of model deployment? So the very first thing you should be asking yourself is how 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 my model will be used. How my model will be used. So what I mean by this statement? What I mean by this statement, I'm just going to give you some examples and show you. Before that, the second question that you should be asking is, what is the frequency of use of my model? Frequency of use. So frequency of use means the model prediction I want to use once in a week, once in a month, once in a year, or every second I want to use, or 10 times in a second I want to use. That is your frequency of use. And how my model will be used is in what kind of scenarios, in what kind of where my model will be used to get the response. Based on these two things, right? There are two very famous modes of model deployment. One mode is known as online mode, and second mode is known as offline mode. What is the difference between online and offline mode? Let me give you one simple example, then it will be very clear to you. Okay. Suppose you have built a model and that model's input data, it's an employee data. For example, I will write here employee data. Okay. And what is your independent features? Independent feature is, let's say, age of the employee and income of the employee. Okay. And what is your target feature? Your target feature is, let's say, expense of the employee. Okay. So you have kind of trained your model on this data, and tomorrow you want to predict. So what you want to give as input, let's say age you want to give as input. Age is equal to, let's say, 21, and income is equal to, let's say 30,000 rupees per month. So you want to give these two things as input and you want to predict what will be the expense. This prediction I can do in two ways. What are the two ways I can do this prediction in? I can simply have either an API or a front end. Front end means a website you can simply think of where there will be two boxes, one for entering age, one for entering income, and I click on submit and I get the expense. Okay. And second option could be I can have an Excel sheet like this. I can have an Excel sheet. In this Excel sheet, I can have data for employee 1, employee 2, employee 3, employee 4. Okay. E1, E2, E3, E4. For all the employees, I have the age and I have the income. I have the age and I have the income. I have the age and I have the income. I take this Excel sheet and I use it on the same model to predict expense for all these employees. One more time, guys, two different ways of doing the prediction. First, through an API or through a front end, I give my 1 point entry and get 1 point output. Second, I give a batch of inputs and I get a batch of outputs. What is the difference between these two modes is first mode that I explained you is known as online deployment. Online deployment, that is way one. And second mode that I explained you is called a offline deployment, or you use that in a offline deployment mode, that is called way 2. Let me show you one example of online deployment. If I go to my browser, you will see that I have deployed a model here. So I'm going to my browser. The same model that I was talking about, this is my expense prediction model. Okay. So it will take income of the employee 21,000. It will take age of the employee 21. And I say predict expense. It gives me the expense. Okay. But I cannot upload an Excel sheet here. I cannot give like thousands of employees data here. So what I want to do here, I want to get a real time inference. Hence, this model has to be always synchronous. So I will write these keywords here so that you don't forget it. Okay. What are the properties of an online deployment? Let me write here. Properties of online deployment. So online deployment will always be real time, because you saw I gave the input and I got the output. Synchronous means you give the input and you get the output. And it will be a normally a point prediction. Point prediction means one values prediction, not multiple values prediction. Okay, point prediction. How the offline mode of deployment will look like? It will be a non-real time or batch prediction. So if I upload Excel sheet and I want to make a prediction, it will not be a real time, it will be a non-real time. Batch prediction, okay, you can call it asynchronous, and you can call it a, multiple values, multi-point prediction, I can say here, multi-point prediction. Now, based on the two questions that we asked in the beginning, you can decide whether you want a offline deployment or online deployment. How my model will be used means whether I want to, predict something like um, where the result is very, it should be an online system. For example, credit card fraud. So at the moment fraud happens, it should get notified to the bank. So it has to be an online prediction. Okay. Suppose I want to do a loan default prediction. It can be a batch prediction as well, because as a bank, I have, let's say, 50,000 customer. I run that in the night. In the morning, I see the result, which people is, will be defaulting in the future. That can be a batch prediction or offline prediction. So understand this basic difference: online prediction and offline prediction, batch prediction and point prediction. Okay. Now here I showed you one user interface, right? Like this, a user interface like this. The same thing we can do through an API call also. Before that, if somebody wants to understand more about this model that I'm showing you here, unfold data science, Flask model deployment. If you say this, you are going to get that model that I was showing you now in the browser. Okay, deployment of machine learning model, two parts you will get here. Deployment of machine learning model part 1, part 2. So that is what I was showing you right now in browser here. Fine. This is your model deployment online that I'm showing you now. Second thing I want to show you here, if you want to understand more about Flask API. Okay. So unfold data science, fast API. So I have created a video. If you don't understand what is an API and how API works, you can see this video, build your first API in 10 minutes. So you will understand how API works and what is an API basically. So to keep it very short, the two values that I gave it input there, for example, age is equal to 21 and income is equal to 30,000. Using these two values, I can call an API and my model will give me the same output that it is giving me in the front end. Okay. So that is what I'm saying is, a online model can be used through a front end HTML page or through an API. I hope this point is clear, because API I'll be using in my demo. So I'm telling you, understand API. API is nothing but a way to interact between two computers. So you send something and you get something as a response. Now, what I want you to understand is, in SageMaker, there are two offerings that is very important. So if you go to SageMaker, right? So I will go to SageMaker. I will show you from the start. In SageMaker, if you go right, and if you go to inference, then you will see here something called as batch transform job. And here you will see something called as create batch transform job. So batch transform job here is for your offline model deployment, not online model deployment. Okay. But if you go to endpoints, then you will see online deployed model. So here you will see a model called linear learner. This I have deployed for the demo purpose, and I will show you demo on this. How I have deployed it, I'm going to show you. But just to let you know, endpoints means online deployment, batch transform jobs means, I mean to say service wise means offline deployment, this you use for. Okay. But how I have created this endpoint and how I am going to use, going to use this endpoint. So let me try to explain you what is the problem that I'm trying to solve here, or what is my input data. Okay. So on my desktop, there is a file called UFO. So here on my desktop, you can see a file called UFO. What is this file is? UFO, you know, right? Unidentified foreign objects. So in this file, I have multiple unidentified foreign objects UFO data. Okay. So my target column is this column, research outcome. This is your open source data, you can get it. So for example, when was the UFO seen? What was the shape of the UFO? For how much duration UFO was seen? How many witnesses were for the UFO? What was the weather? First name, last name, etc. Many things are there regarding the UFO, where the UFO was seen and what is the physical evidence. Contact could be made or contact could not be made. And in the end column O is the research outcome, means whether the UFO was explained, unexplained, or there is a, it's a three class problem. So there are three classes here: probable, explained, and unexplained. So three categories in your target column, and rest is your UFO independent feature. So this is my training data. From this training data, I have trained a model in AWS SageMaker, and the same model I have deployed here in the endpoint. Okay, I will go to how I have done that and how I have deployed the model. Before that, let me show you the use part of the model. Okay, so here you can see this is my endpoint. Now I'm going to use this endpoint through Lambda and show you how you can make the prediction. Okay, so um, you have to come to something known as Lambda. If you search here LAMBDA Lambda, right, then a page like this will open, AWS Lambda console. And in this Lambda, you can see two functions here. Now, some of you, Lambda may be a new term for you. Okay. So what you have to do is you have to go here and say unfold data science Lambda. Okay. You will not find a better video than this if you are a beginner in the world of AWS. This is a 24 minutes video, AWS Lambda tutorial for beginners. Very, very important component from AWS point of view. Please watch this video. You will understand what is Lambda. But to continue on this video, I just want to say Lambda is a serverless engine in AWS in which you can run some code based on your need. Okay. So if I go to Lambda functions, I have written a function here. The name of my function is predict from model. Okay. So if you can see here, I'm using that model which I showed you now. Model means my endpoint. Okay. And what I'm doing is I'm just getting the response from that model. If prediction is 0, then unexplained. If prediction is 1, then explained. If prediction is 2, then probable. So I'm just mapping my prediction to three categories. And here what I'm doing is I'm just giving my endpoint. And what is my endpoint? Endpoint is nothing but if you go to my environment variables, right, you will see in the endpoint name. So in the configuration, if you go to environment variable, then you will see that you see endpoint underscore name is this. Where from this name is coming? This name is what I showed you here. Okay, so just copy this name, create a endpoint variable and put it here. Okay, and then save. Once you save that and you come to predict from model, then what will happen is when your Lambda function runs, that model will be called with that input, whatever you supply. Okay. So here, if you're not understanding the syntax of this, don't worry. If you watch the Lambda tutorial, you'll be very easily able to understand. There is nothing fancy happening here. Just one input is coming and that model is getting called. But how that input is coming, I'm going to create a API for that. Okay. So you have to come to AWS and go to something known as API gateway. If you go to API gateway, what I want to do is I want to create a API to call my Lambda function. So I will just write it here, how my flow is working, right? So here, what I'm doing is I have my learned model. Okay. Where my learned model is stored? My learned model is stored in SageMaker inference. Okay. And how my learned model will be called is using a Lambda function, using Lambda. Okay. but this Lambda function expects me to pass some inputs. Inputs means for what input you want to make that prediction. So this is a model, right? So you want to give some input like age 21 and salary, I mean income 21,000. So here I will call this Lambda function call using API with inputs. Okay, so Lambda function is a bridge between API and model. Okay, so Lambda function I have written. Now I'm going to create a API. So I'm here and I will just go here and say build a API. Simple REST API I will build. I will go here and I will say new API, and I will go here and I will say my simple API. And here I'm going to say my API for model prediction. Remember guys, APIs and front end treat it in the same way. So here I will do the same thing that I'm doing here, just that I will do through command line without a fancy UI. Okay, so here I will go and I will say create API. If I say create API, I have to go to action and say create method. In this method, I have to say post, and in this post method, I will just pass my input. Okay, I will just pass my input. So I will go here and I will say, what is my Lambda function through which I want to call this API? I will go and copy my Lambda function ARN from here. Copy the ARN, go to API gateway, paste this, predict from model. It will save. Okay, and my API is ready. Now I can test this API with some input. So I have, when I was testing this, I have kept a input aside for testing this model. Okay, so let me take that and test this model. Here is the sample request through which I can test this model. So as you know, there were these many inputs in my model. So I'm passing these input. These are nothing but your input parameters, okay, in JSON format. So I will take this data and I will go to my API and I will simply say test, and in the request body, I will give my data and I will say test. At the moment I say test, you can see that model is being called and output is unexplained. So there were three outcomes in my unexplained, probable, or explained, right? So if I go ahead and change some of these things, for example, 85, or I make it 100, maybe some output may change because based on the input feature, something may change, right? So I will come here and I will say test, and here you can say probable. So what is happening here, guys? This flow is completed. So I have kept my learned model deployed in the inference of my SageMaker, which I'm calling using Lambda, but Lambda needs input parameters. Those parameters I'm passing through API. Okay, this is the complete flow. Now, few things to note here. Whenever you are creating a Lambda function, you should give that Lambda function permission to interact with SageMaker, and you should also give the Lambda function permission to run with API gateway. Otherwise, what will happen is due to the permissions, it may not run properly. Okay, permission issues will come. So add the policies. I have explained in too much detail about policies and all in my AWS video. You can watch that from the playlist section of Unfold Data Science AWS. So go here, search for playlist AWS. You will find, see how many videos are there, 14 videos. So I have explained all the things in detail, like how the policies work in AWS. Just watch those, it will be very clear for you. For now, this is how the prediction is being made, but I am yet to walk you through how I have trained the model, okay, and how I have deployed it. So let me go to home, and this is a very simple Jupyter notebook through which I have trained and deployed that model. So what I have done is, the first thing is the CSV file that I showed you. That CSV file I have put in S3. So as you know, S3 is easier to interact with in the world of AWS or machine learning in AWS or SageMaker. Okay, so I'm just importing the necessary modules if you see here, and then I have already loaded the data here, my test bucket 21st November. So if I go to S3, okay, you will see that my CSV file is there. So this CSV file UFO data set, this UFO.csv is same that I was showing you here. Okay, So I have manually uploaded that USB UFO.csv in my S3 bucket, and then I'm using that in my model. Now, one important thing here, guys, whatever I'm explaining you till the last step where I deploy the model, till the last step, whatever I'm explaining you, all that thing you will find in a video called Build, Train, Deploy Model in SageMaker. This video, okay? If you see this video, this is a 17 minutes video. You will find all the details of how to build, train, and deploy model in SageMaker. But here I'm going to show you few additional steps which I have done for this use case. So I will come here, I will load the data from S3, then cleaning, transforming, and preparing the data set. Since this is use case based, and you most of you know what is missing value treatment, how we can format the dates, and how we can drop the irrelevant columns. So I will not go into much detail of cleaning, transforming, and preparing the data set. And in SageMaker, if you have to train a model, then there are two ways you can do, three ways basically. Either you can use a SageMaker built-in algorithm, or you can purchase from marketplace, or you can bring your own model. Here I am using SageMaker's built-in algorithm. Okay. So here train, test, and validation division is happening. These are pretty simple things to understand. Here SageMaker recommends you to use in the pipe mode. So one important thing here, guys, in the world of SageMaker, the recommendation is use the data in pipe mode from S3. Okay. If you want to use the data in pipe mode from S3, then you have to convert data in a format called this format, prot.buf.data. And it's not very difficult to convert. You can very easily convert this. Okay. I have written the code here. It's easy to convert. So both input and validation I have converted, and I have taken the image URI. As I told you, I am using the SageMaker's given algorithm, linear learner. I am doing that here. I am defining a job the same way we define a job in SageMaker, and then I am just running the training here. Okay. So if you can see here, container role, instance count, output path. So all these things are set previously. Where is my model output will sit and all these things. Once the model training finishes, right, then it will dump my model to implementation operation, this folder. So if you go here, right, in this folder it will dump my model. So here it is dumping my model. Okay, see here, model.tar.gz. This is the format of the model always, right? So this is where the model is dumped. Now what I have to do is I have to take this model and deploy that so that it is available in the inference section as a endpoint, right? So as a endpoint it's available here. So how to do that is pretty simple in the world of SageMaker. You just have to say one line, okay? That model.deploy, and then you have to give on what type of instance you want to deploy. This is basically an EC2 instance. Okay. At the moment you say your model.deploy and endpoint, everything inference will be getting started in the backend, and an endpoint will be created for you in the SageMaker endpoints. At the moment this is available, you can use in whatever way you want. In this case I have used with a Lambda function through API gateway. You can use with other way as well. Okay. So just one more time, I will reiterate whatever I explained, everything from end to end, key pointers only. Every time you talk of model deployment, understand whether it should be a offline deployment or online deployment. If it's a offline deployment, one video reference I forgot to tell you for offline deployment. So you have to go to Unfold Data Science and you have to search for something known as Unfold Data Science Unix model deployment. You will find three videos here, guys. I must tell you, it's very important for you to watch these three videos. See here, machine learning model deployment part 1, part 2, and part 3. If you watch these three videos, right, then it will be very clear for you what is the difference between an online deployment and offline deployment, and how offline deployment works in big data and Unix platform. So this is deployed on the Unix platform. Watch these three videos to understand offline deployment. Okay. Coming back to the revision part, we understood the differences between online and offline at high level. I gave you some reference videos where you can understand both these types. Okay. SageMaker offerings batch transform and endpoints for both these categories of deployments. I showed you some example of how you can make predictions, and you have to understand these keywords: synchronous, asynchronous, point prediction, multi-point prediction. And from the demo point of view, we built a model in Sagemaker. We deployed it and it went into the inference as a endpoint. This endpoint we took, we understood from the Lambda function we have to call that endpoint, and how the Lambda will be invoked. Lambda will be invoked through an API gateway. That API I created in front of you right now. Pretty simple to create this API. And then there is a sample request through which you can call that model. Okay. So I'm going to share with you most of these things, but not everything. The reason for that is I want you to write some of the codes. Okay. So if you don't write, you will not understand. So that is about end-to-end flow, guys, how you can deploy endpoint and how you can make use of it through API gateway. If you have any questions, drop me a comment. How did you like this video? Please give me a thumbs up if you like this video. See you all in the next video. Wherever you are, stay safe and take care.